Good morning, America. Thank you for watching Taxes Made Easy. So, just wanted to cover a lot of news today. It's Friday. A lot has come out from the DNC um, and the Harris campaign. So, just found some articles, really good articles actually, from the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and some others talking about what are Kamala Harris's tax plans, what will be the cost, and what are we looking at. So I think we have some really good information to cover, and we're really going to take a deep dive into this today, as best we have it. So again, there's always the concern that Harris hasn't put out a lot of policy specifics. You go to our website, there's not much there, and that's by design. So again, this is classic, hiding in the basement, a la Joe Biden. But again, there's enough details out there, and based on what she says, we can piece together an idea. Welcome back, everybody. So, got a lot of interesting things to cover today, a lot happening in the news, and it's going to be interesting to see how things turn out. So, first of all, uh, interesting article we're going to share about college enrollment. So, ironically, college enrollment is up, but in this for the Epic Times, 99 schools closed last year. Most were private, non-for-profit institutions. Most of these were, a lot of them we heard closing mainly due to fraud or just lack of funds. A lot of them were the let's get a 2-year degree or a certificate program. While those struggle more than most, there's a lot of concern that they charge a lot, provide very little benefit. That a lot of times those certificates aren't worth very much. But again, it also affected people's ability to get 2-year certificates or degrees for on hands, for trade schools. So out of the 99 schools that closed, 54 were private for profit, 17 were private 4-year schools, which is even more surprising. 15 were public 2-year schools, and 7 were private 2-year schools. So, whether or not this is a bad thing, I think it's interesting that uh, undergraduate enrollment increased, but the question is why. So 5.8 million were enrolled on online programs. Now, there's been a huge push into online programs. There's a lot of schools. One that I'm familiar with is BYU is putting out what's called a Pathways program to help people enroll and earn college credits through. They have a campus up in BYU, Idaho, right now, up in Rexburg, and there's a pathway for people to get not only a 2-year degree but 4-year degree, mostly online. It's not easy, but it's a cheap, affordable way for people to get online. People can do that. People that are struggling, and it makes it a lot easier for them to get a college degree. That's very commendable. Another part of it is 2.5 million. So there's an increase of about 1 million students over time. But we have 2.5 million high school students earning college credits. So that's not exactly representative of college students. My own son went to a local community college and did his senior year in a community college and pretty much had dual enrollment. So he still got to walk and graduate from high school, but he then actually got a full year of college under his belt. That is gaining in popularity. I think it's great that students that are ready for the college, especially the first couple of years of general ed, can get their college path started sooner because essentially learning the same thing. But again, it just shows that even though we have an overall increase, it might not be representative of what's actually going on. We don't have more people going. Well, we do have more people enrolled in college, but it's a lot of it is 2.5 million of it is students um, in high school going and taking college classes. But again, I think that's a good thing overall, but it doesn't indicate an overall increase in people going to college. Um, School is when the economy is questionable. School is a good place to be honest. As long as you can afford going to school, it's a great time to get in there, study, prepare yourself for when the economy turns around. It's hard to get jobs. It's hard to get experience when the economy is bad. And so if you're struggling to get a job, getting better education, training, skills is always a good route to go. So the next article from the Washington Examiner. Now, it's really interesting. I went to a business meeting yesterday, and there was a lot of people very excited for EVs. Pardon me. So while you have a lot of people that are still buying and interested in EVs, the overall market demand for EVs is really crashing. So, Toyota, Honda, they've moved primarily to hybrids now, which I think is a great option. But again, soft demand, another announcement that they're just completely getting rid of an electric three-row SUV and replacing it with hybrid models. So again, you have less than expected EV demand, and it looks like they're going more and more to hybrid vehicles, which is still a good option. And so it's delaying the plans for new electric vehicles by 2 years for 2027 release date. Well, that's what they had said previously, and now they're just scrapping the model altogether, saying, people that are purchasing EVs now are more cost conscious, and there's more and more pricing pressures here. So this is bad news for the government trying to claim and push for all electric vehicles, I think by 2035. But I think we need to count not only are vehicles a lot more efficient today, if we get a lot more hybrid models out there, that creates even more efficiencies. And EVs are not carbon neutral. So again, despite what people think, when you look at the overall cost to produce and to keep them running, charge them, it's not carbon neutral unless you're completely set up for solar. So again, the EV business is set to lose about $5 billion this year, and that's what we're seeing time and time again from different car manufacturers. So while long term, hopefully we do go carbon neutral. It's not something I'm opposed to. We want to do it in a way that makes sense, and if consumers just aren't buying EVs, it really kind of limits the opportunity here. This is a very important article. It just happened yesterday. Trump appeared next to the border, and there was a gentleman. He has a long criminal history, made threatening posts on social media targeting Trump for over 2 days, knowing that Trump was going to come into town. And the Secret Service apparently did their job, working with local law enforcement. They launched a manhunt to locate this guy that had been threatening to kill the president as he's coming into town. So no, you can't go and threaten to kill presidential candidates or politicians. It's called, it's a threat on someone's life. And so it was this, 66-year-old Ronald Lee. And here's Mr. Lee. And he has outstanding warrants for Wisconsin for DUI, failure to appear for DUI from Graham County, Arizona, and for a hit and run, and failure to register as a sex offender. So I do think we need to be very careful here, especially given the assassination attempt that already happened. Here's Trump speaking outside, but this time he's surrounded by bulletproof glass. So kind of sad that to have an event like this, that he does have to be surrounded by bulletproof glass. And again, this is why we need more civility rather than more rhetoric and angry rhetoric, which, again, it can be argued is still very much out there and threatening. Jumping to the next article, another big political news set to happen today. Yeah, it hasn't happened, but Trump is supposed to be doing a big rally in Phoenix, in the Glendale area. And the rumors are that Robert F. Kennedy, a Democrat and a liberal by most accounts, is set to drop out of the race because he doesn't have a path to victory and endorse Trump. So this hasn't happened, but even his Kennedy's vice president, his running mate, the vice presidential candidate for him, has said this is probably what's going to happen. So it's expected that Robert F. Kennedy will drop out today, endorse Trump. Again, this is CNN reporting. It's the Washington Examiner. This is a CNN video that they're showing that Trump has actually made statements that not only would he welcome the endorsement, but he would consider having Robert F. Kennedy serve in his administration. So Robert Kennedy couldn't get Secret Service. So again, the similar things. He's had death threats. His own father and his uncle, JFK and Robert F. Kennedy, were both assassinated. So he's been very sensitive to what's been happening here as far as Trump. So again, why would he? So this could have a huge impact on the presidential race. The question is, why would a liberal endorse Trump? So really, he feels that the left is gone. They've gone far too left, and also Robert F. Kennedy hasn't appreciated how he's been treated by the Democrat Party. Wasn't given a real chance. Was ignored. They're sued to keep off the ballots, and the Democrats have been successful in keeping him off the ballots in many states. And to him, he doesn't see that democracy has been respected. He's concerned about the corporate the corporate influence and also the elite influence from Hollywood and others that pretty much control the Democrat Party. The whole idea of booting Joe Biden and throwing Harris in there has been historic, but not in a good way. So again, there's a lot of, it talks about the anti-vaccine sentiment, and Kamala Harris right now is requiring that her staff still get vaccinated. And we're in 2024. Would she push some of the vaccine mandates out on the United States again? Who knows? But again, he really represents disaffected Republicans and more moderate Republicans, but Kennedy actually takes more votes from Trump and than anything else. So I don't know. It's very interesting. A lot of voter crossover. We'll see what happens, but that should come out today. Watch for that. If he actually does make that announcement, I would question why. Why would Kennedy support Trump? And he'll probably state as much in his speech today if he actually comes out and announces support for Trump. And what issues does he agree with Trump? Because I know there's plenty of issues he doesn't agree with Trump. So, it'd be interesting to see what actually happens, and that news will come out today, and we'll be talking about it next week, of course. So we're actually in a break. So we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back, everybody. So I went a little over on that last article, really talking about why Robert F. Kennedy Jr. would support Trump. They disagree on a lot of issues, but I think there are some issues that they do agree on. But I just think it's very interesting to see him supporting Trump over Kamala Harris when he's a pretty solid Democrat, and it has been his whole life. So again, if he makes that announcement today, this evening in Arizona, it's going to be very interesting to see why and what are the reasons for that. But again, it's been widely reported. Trump has spoken out against it or about it, and he said he would accept the support and even consider nominating Kennedy to serve in his administration, which would be interesting, to say the least. Jumping to some IRS news, we have a couple interesting things. Nothing too new. We know interest rates are probably going to get cut in September, especially with the latest downward revision here that we're going to get to in just a second in jobs. But that hasn't happened yet. And so the IRS, this is kind of like ho-hum, same old thing going on. Interest rates are remaining the same for the fourth quarter of 2024. So that means for all of 2024, most people are going to get hit 8% for overpayments. So if you pay more, you'll get that back. 7% for corporations. So on overpayments, you'll get 8% interest past the due date. 8% penalty, though, for underpayments. This is the thing that's going to hit most people. So if you haven't, this is for taxes owed but not fully paid, but it's also the same, right, if you didn't do estimated tax payments throughout the current year. And I've been hammering on this and talking about this a lot. This is going to be a big surprise. Because last year, before it was 1 to 2% when the interest rates were really low. Then it kind of went up to 3%. Then this year it shot up to 8%, which is a pretty hefty jump. People are going to get surprised if you're not paying enough in estimated tax payments, or if you're not having enough withheld. You need to make those adjustments, or you're going to get surprised, and not in a good way. So again, that's through the rest of this year. They're going to stay at 8%. So no relief there from IRS, and probably won't happen until the Fed actually cuts their rate, and then they might change it for next year. So I was not sharing that, but again, so just same old news. Nothing's happening, but hopefully things will change coming up when the Fed makes their change. Now, this is an interesting side article, and this is for school teachers. So go ahead and share that article. This is almost a travesty, and this is, well, really much is. I'm glad they get something. $300 in expenses deductible for 2024. If you know a teacher that only spends $300 on supplies, on things for their classroom for the year, I would be very surprised. Most teachers spend much more than $300 on their classrooms, on supplies, on especially for younger classes, tissues alone. Clorox wipe. I know they ask for donations every single year. But why are they capped at $300? We want to support teachers. We want to help them out. They spend a lot more than this for their job. They're usually not, the school districts don't support them on this. And so why can't the IRS actually give them credit? We talk about supporting teachers. And I'm one that's not, I'm more conservative in my views, but this is a real issue. Teachers spend a lot of money on school supplies, and they're not compensated. They don't get any. They can't deduct this. So this goes over who qualifies for the educator expense deductions, what is actually deductible, books, supplies, equipment, COVID-19 safety measures. They also deduct for professional development courses, if you're teaching and you're not claiming this, you're doing something wrong. It's only $300. I really think it should be much higher. I don't even know why there's a cap on it. I guess it could be used and abused, which is probably why there's a cap, but I think it should probably be more like 1,200. I really think Congress can make a small adjustment here to help teachers out because they do spend a lot of money on their classrooms. Everybody knows it, and nobody's really recognizing it or helping teachers out. So if you know a teacher, remind them of this. And so I want to jump to the topic of the day, and there's a lot of information here. And most of it is here in this New York Times article. And we've got a few other articles that we're going to share after this. But this New York Times article really does a good job. And I'll give them kudos. I'm not always a fan of the New York Times. But they do a good job breaking this down. The reporter here, Andrew Druin, I'm going to mess his name up, really kind of breaks down what she said, what's come from her campaign. And the difficult part here, though, is that they are very light on details. They don't even have the policies up on their website, or they didn't the last time I checked. And the whole DNC convention was very light on details. A lot of puffery, a lot of hope, a lot of Trump is evil. But what's your plan? So they have alluded to they're pretty much going along with the Biden White House, with the Biden campaign, what they had proposed, and the ideas. So without clearer guidance from the campaign, people are filling in the blanks. So again, that's the very first thing that he says in a campaign, otherwise light on policy specifics. She quietly rolled out her most detailed proposals yet. So as they come out with these details, I think it's very important. We'll go into any campaign, any presidential race, or even a local race. We should be talking about the issues. We should talk about how it's going to actually help people, not personality attacks, not, this side is evil, they have horns, let's draw things on them or whatever. We need, part of being civil is taking a step back and looking at facts and arguing policies. How is this truly going to help or hurt the American public? So he estimates a nearly $5 trillion tax increase over a decade. That's $500 billion a year, which puts a dent in how much we're spending, but it still doesn't cover the almost $2 trillion that we're overspending this year alone. So $5 trillion in tax increase is really the number that they're talking about. And they talk about these numbers. I like to put them into perspective. What does it actually mean for our budget? And yearly, that would be about $500 billion. So it would decrease our overspending by 25% if they don't increase spending, which that's the bigger problem. We really need to pull back on spending, and the Harris campaign has been hasn't suggested any cutbacks to the federal government that I'm aware of. A lot more spending campaigns, a lot more things that she wants to do and spend money on. And that's one of the things he's going to talk about as we go through this, even though she wants to raise taxes by $5 trillion. With her tax proposals that she suggested that would erase most of that $500 trillion gain. So more taxes here, more tax breaks here, or more spending plans there, and it gets wiped out anyway, and we're right back in the same boat or worse. So that's an overview of this article. Breaking it down, she's still going with President Biden's plan and campaign promise that no one making $400,000 a year or less would see their taxes go up. Maybe not directly, but indirectly, absolutely. this idea that they're not going to hurt anybody making less than $400,000. The IRS is hell on wheels right now, going after all Americans. The IRS has been weaponized. They have been made into a much worse bureaucracy overall. And under the current leadership, another 4 years of this would see the IRS become much worse and much more burdensome on businesses and taxpayers across the spectrum. We're talking from people retired on just Social Security to middle class and the wealthy. It's across the board. So I'd love to see that number, and in my experience and what I'm seeing and reading, even though they don't technically raise taxes, it's going to hurt people across the board. And there's plenty of things that will do exactly that. So, but they keep putting this out there. We're only going to hurt the rich. We're only going to hurt the rich and corporations. Who invests in corporations? Anybody with a 401k, anybody with an IRA, anybody that's investing in the stock market for their future, for their retirement. That's millions of Americans making less than $400,000 a year. So moving on, because he really breaks it down bit by bit. This is something I've already mentioned and talked about quite a bit. Chief tax increase is corporate tax. Wants to increase it to 28% from 21%. And that's estimates, Department of Treasury estimates this will bring in $1.3 trillion in revenue over the next 10 years. So the federal government is really bad at their estimates. Everybody said that with the Trump tax cuts that revenues would go down. The only time they went down was during the midst of COVID in 2020. But every other year, people went out and they were more productive. So if you look at the revenue numbers year by year, they went up. This last year, they're higher than ever. When you raise taxes, you get less of an item. So why would they take corporate profits? Why wouldn't they invest? They're going to reduce their corporate profits, which is going to reduce the tax rate. And even though they estimated it could bring in 1.3 trillion, a lot of times when you raise taxes, it is counterproductive. So again, when Trump lowered the tax rate, overall revenues went up. By increasing that tax rate, any gain that you actually get might be count or offset by less productivity, less revenue overall, by people just shifting their energies elsewhere. So another interesting thing is the stock buybacks that people were using to avoid paying taxes and get that write-off. You're going to increase that from 1% to 4%. Was part of the Inflation Reduction Act to raise it to 1%. And then they have to pay taxes at least on 50% of what they report to investors. So even though on their final numbers might look very different, and what people show on a profit and loss is very different from what is actually put on a tax return, this will greatly increase taxes for businesses. This is mostly when you have investors, etc. So what does she mean by big companies? Where's the line? Who knows? But again, these are really what drives people's investments in the stock market, 401ks, IRAs, etc. So it's to stop people from shrinking their tax liability as close to zero as possible, which of course they'll continue to do. If they can't do that, though, they're going to look elsewhere. And they want to increase that minimum tax to 21% from 15%. So it's again a big increase on that. So looking at multinational companies, foreign earned incomes, he wants to essentially double that tax from 10.5% currently to 21%. So and then she wants to disallow companies from deducting the compensation of all employees making more than 1 million. So right now, if you have a company and someone's making more than $1 million, well, anybody, you deduct that as an expense. It's a cost of doing business. If you can't deduct that, you're paying someone, a high net worth individual. This is designed to target CEOs or top level management. But if you can't deduct it and you're getting taxed on it, that's a $200,000 increase in your tax bill, and it's a cost that you actually are spending, but you still have to pay taxes on it. So that's, especially for larger companies that have a lot of overhead or upper management, it's going to really hurt. I guess part of that is to discourage paying CEOs so much. I'm not sure, but again, it will increase the tax burden on corporations, which just gets passed on to the average taxpayer. So moving on, high earning incomes would pay more. They would increase the rate they pay on existing income taxes, and they would reshape the taxation of investment gains for the wealthiest taxpayers. So currently, top rate is 37%. She wants to, by letting the Trump tax cuts expire for the wealthiest, it would go up to 39.6%. 2.6%. You would think that's not the big deal. But again, she would also increase the rate on Medicare surtaxes, how the rich pay more to try to continue to finance Medicare, to 5% from 3.8%. And expand the income subject to one of them. So basically, right now, once you make over $166,000, a lot of the taxes, the Social Security taxes, cap out because you're not going to get any further benefit from them. One proposal to help prop up Social Security and Medicare is to get rid of that, and it helps a little bit, but again, it's going to really increase the taxes. So going from 37%, it's going to create a top marginal rate as high as 44.6%. So when you are getting taxed at that rate, what do people do? They don't take as large of income. They get paid in other ways through stocks, etc. But a 44.6%, and then you add in state taxes on top of that. If you're in New York, you're in California, a high tax area, you're getting taxed at a rate of 50 to 60% of your income, right off the top, going to taxes. So if that's not socialism, it's getting pretty close. And that's the thing, is before, when the Carter administration had taxes up to around 70%, they were up to around 90% right after World War II. And what did people do? They just didn't take an income. There were plenty of loopholes. They got their money elsewhere, other ways, which is why eventually they got rid of the loopholes but lowered the rates. Here, we're keeping we got rid of most of the loopholes, but then jacking up those top marginal rates, you're going to see a huge difference. People aren't going to invest in money. Why would they? They'll go overseas. Money will go overseas. And so for people making more than $1 million a year, investment earnings, so capital gains taxes, are usually taxed at a much smaller rate for capital gains taxes, 15 to 20%. Now they would tax those at the same rate as regular income. So to encourage investing, and that's where a lot of people, the wealthy, make their money, is through investing, through having stocks, bonds, investing in the overall market. To tax them at the same rate would take the tax rate from 15 to 20% and raise it to 44.6% to the federal government. Plus, if the states follow suit, again, you add that tax rate on for the states, it's 50 to 60%, depending on the state. That is a huge difference. So this is soaking the rich. And the rich normally don't sit there and just take it. They usually go elsewhere. They take their ball elsewhere and go away. Bye-bye, I don't need to be here. Another issue here is step up in basis. So this gets a little complicated, and we're up against another break, so we will be right back. Welcome back, everybody. If this seems like it's getting a little arcane into the nitty gritty here, it is. Step up in basis is a huge thing that affects farms. It affects people passing on inheritances to their children. And one of the biggest criticisms of getting rid of a step up in basis is that when people inherit property from their families, if they get taxed on it, then usually they have to sell the asset that they're getting just to pay the taxes on it. For example, if someone inherits a family farm, it's been in the family for 40 years, that idea is that if it was purchased for 100,000 back in the 50s, today it's worth 10 million. That's a huge increase in value, but it's still the same farm. So if they have to pay taxes on that 10 million and that the farm is supposedly worth, there's no way a farm can come up with $3 to $4 million to keep the farm and keep it in operation. So this is the idea of having to step up in basis, that they can keep property within a family. They can continue to run these family businesses without having this huge tax when properties pass from one generation to another. So it is a tool that many wills and trusts and estate attorneys use to help plan for people. But taxing this huge step in basis, they say it's going to target the rich. It's going to target the middle class as well. It's not just the rich that uses this. And it will increase taxes on anybody inheriting money, inheriting property through a trust, a will, anything like that. So this would be a huge increase in taxes. Now, this is something that another tax would be $100 million wealth tax. Would have to pay at least 25% on a combination of their income and unrealized capital gains. So this is very interesting because you get a lot of information coming back. And this is the New York Times. I'm not going to some right-wing newspaper here. And again, he puts in here that unrealized gains will be taxed, which is money that people haven't actually experienced. So if your stocks, bonds, real estate, other assets go up, but they haven't sold, they want to tax them just because their stocks have increased. So people will have to liquidate assets to pay the taxes just to keep the stocks. For example, with Bitcoin, it goes up, it goes down. People that have Bitcoin and that fall into this category, and this is really targeting people with more than 100 million in wealth. If Bitcoin goes up like it has recently, they would have to pay taxes on it even though they didn't cash it out. Now, a lot of these taxes start off as just for the wealthy, and then they get applied to others. This is a huge thing. Taxing unrealized gains is again, here's issue after issue that apparently they're supporting that would really hit the wealthy right in the pocketbook, would hurt the wealthiest in America. And the problem is, by creating class warfare and really going after the wealthy, you're going to hurt a lot of people too. Because again, the government, what do they do with the money? They just spend it. So again, we have all these tax cuts coming out, but extending the tax cuts could take up much of the roughly $4 trillion costs for all the continuing lapsing provisions. So again, she wants to raise $5 trillion, but if you continue the tax cuts, it could cost $4 trillion, which really would offset things. But you have proposed tax cuts, other tax cuts coming through that are estimated to cost another $2 trillion over a decade. They want the salt tax limit removed. So this is state and local tax deductions for largely very expensive blue states, which forces the federal government to subsidize blue states that have very high tax bills and have red states pay for it. Is that fair? That's a completely different argument. And so just looking at this, the $5 trillion in tax increases soaking the rich here may not ultimately be enough to cover the cost of her and other Democrats' ambitions next year. And it's really going to create some pretty scary incentives. Now, one of the things he mentioned was the wealth tax. So this is the New York Times. This is the next article is from the Los Angeles Times, ironically. And this guy comes out and says, no, Harris isn't planning to tax your unrealized capital gains. But a wealth tax is still a good idea. So I love how they push this idea of a wealth tax going after, the just overall wealth that people have saved up, especially soaking the rich. But they don't want to, but we're not going to tax your unrealized gains. So we're not going to do this scary thing. But hey, we should go after the wealthy. So the Times, New York Times, is saying yeah, this is something they're considering and is part of her plan. Los Angeles Times, along with other liberal newspapers, you can pull it up. They're saying, no, nobody's going to tax unrealized capital gains. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody's talking about it. But they have talked about it. It was part of Joe Biden's overall plan. And that's the articles we're going to talk about next. So here's the problem with Kamala Harris not coming out and not clearly laying out what her tax plan is. And I'd like to see more details from Trump too. But again, this is unfortunately not an election. It's more an election about personality. And I have people I know that are posting about, oh, we have hope again. Like, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. Now, this hopey change effect that Obama capitalized on as well, it didn't mean anything. What are they actually going to do? What are their policies? How is this actually going to affect people? They don't want to talk about that. They just want to run on feel-good emotions, which drives me nuts. So here he comes out and he doesn't pull any punches. That fetid gust of hot air that you might have detected wafting from Republican and conservative social media postings over the last day or two was a fabricated claim, means a lie, that Kamala Harris is plotting to tax everyone's realized capital gains. So no, she's not talking about taxing everyone's, just the rich. So he's saying it'd have to be passed by Congress to get it through. But I mean, it is something they're talking about. So again, he finds this little different distinction here that they're not planning to tax everyone's unrealized gains, just the rich. But the problem is when you pass those laws, it tends to creep down once when the camel gets their nose out of the tent and gets applied to others. So and he not only calls it a fabrication, which is calling it a lie. It's a mythical allegation. It hasn't stopped right wingers. Blah blah blah. I mean, this is really a partisan hack job, but it contradicts what the New York Times is saying, which is not a liberal publication. Well, it is a liberal publication. So, and so because the Harris campaign has been short on details, a lot of people are saying, hey, if taxing unrealized gains is truly the most insane, economy destroying, innovation killing, market crashing, retirement fund decimating, unconstitutional idea, which was probably planted by Russia or China to destroy the economy. Dems need to run away from this wildly stupid idea. Now, Robert Nelson is not a far-right conservative. So she said that she supports the revenue raisers and the Biden-Harris administration budget. Nothing beyond that. But what have they actually proposed? So going after the uber rich, 25% minimum tax for people making more than 100 million, which is essentially a wealth tax. They're taxing people not for making money, but just because they have wealth. That is a very scary thing. So again, she is proposing to tax on unrealized gains, but right now I'm limiting to the wealthy. But at that level of affluence, you don't have grounds to complain about paying a minimum 25% of your annual income. This isn't annual income. This is a wealth tax. And the idea that it won't be applied further down the road to people making less money is I think, silly. Once they start a tax, the tax almost never gets repealed. And so this is a proposal that not only has been put out there by the Harris campaign, as they're talking about, but also by the Biden administration. And she said, look, we're just pretty much going to take Biden administration's tax plans and continue with it. So this idea of soaking the rich is really seeping into all of what she's proposing here. So again, this is from the Hindustan Times, not one I normally see, but again, this is Vivek Ramaswamy calling out their ideas on cap taxing unrealized capital gains, calls it an economic calamity. So again, it kind of explains it, but here's an interesting thing. In 2022, Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, however you want to word it, proposed a minimum 20% income on total income, including unrealized capital gains. So when it was proposed back in 2022, there was no limit. It was just going to target the rich. They didn't say that. So now that they bumped it to 25%, but just targeting the rich, it's the hard thing is that people are looking at what she's put out and trying to interpret what she's doing. So another article here, and I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. This is a Forbes article. So, and this goes back to April 30th. This is when the Biden campaign was talking about taxing unsold asset or unrealized gains. April's just 4 months ago. So she's embracing most of the, pretty much everything that the Biden campaign was proposing. She's saying, hey, whatever they were proposing, we're doing too, and we're going to do more on top of it. And he was talking about 25% annual minimum tax on individuals exceeding 100 million. Again, raising the top module rate to 44.6%, add another 5% on from Medicare, which is what Kamala Harris is proposing increasing. And so this, if you look at the top capital gains tax, it's by making it taxed the same as income tax. You know, again, this is 68, it was down to 25%, it went up through the 70s, dropped down, the 80s, went up in the 90s, now then it went back down to 2012 where it was increased again. And so it really has gone back up, and now we're going to increase it to 44.6% by making it tax the same as other income taxes. So to be clear, and this is key, a lot of these proposals will never get through Congress unless they're controlled by one party. And again, this is not. Imagine purchasing shares from a company for $1 million, and the next year those appreciate to $1.5 million. Under Biden's plan, you would have to owe taxes on the $500,000 gain. Doesn't matter if you sell them or not. That's what unrealized gains are. So will billionaires or people making more than 100 million, will they be investing and reinvesting their funds in stocks, bonds, CDs, in the economy generally? Of course not. They'll go do something else. Or they'll just take their money elsewhere. And so here's the kicker here. And this is where the federal government really is crazy. So you have unrealized losses. So what happens when things go up and then when it goes down? Do you get your money back? No, of course not. So it's just, this is something that was proposed, wasn't really discussed in the media. People didn't really talk about it. But this is a very radical program. Again, soaking the rich, going after them. And again, I don't think it would stay that way at all. So last article, we are actually running out of time. So I'm going to have to save this for next week. So just as a summary, there are a lot of concerns out here. If you're wondering what's happening, pay attention, follow the policies, and we'll continue to give you the best information possible as we go through this and go through this show for you. Thank you and have a great day.